Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Not Boring Book Club with myself, Devin Green, a comedian living in Los Angeles, and my brother, an entrepreneurial vagabond and man of mystery living in Dublin. And this week we're talking about Walden on Wheels, a book about minimalism and van dwelling, written by Ken Ilgunis, a man who graduated from college with a mountain of debt and decided to attack that by embracing his stinky life of a dirty hippie. We are going to start with what we consider to be the one. I just put that up there so you can see it. The one big idea of this particular book. And for me, it stems around this idea of minimalism, which is very popular nowadays. I think there's a documentary on Netflix. People are embracing tiny houses and that sort of thing. I hadn't read about van dwelling, but it's an interesting, very doable alternative to some of those more expensive projects. And what he focuses on is this idea that if you can reduce the amount you spend on things like housing, food, things we just take for granted. That's just a bill. That's not even my money. It just goes out every month. If you can reduce that, it's almost like getting a much higher salary.
Yeah, Devin. I thought of this book as kind of like a millennial on the road. Our author slash protagonist hitchhikes across the country. He moves to Alaska, hanging out with a bunch of meth heads and drunk truck drivers. He paddles across Canada in a birch bark canoe. He lives in the Gulf area, like working for AmeriCorps. And then finally he settles up living in a van down by the river, or at least in a parking lot next to his university. So he's definitely living an unconventional life. And the message of the book that I took away was so many people just wander into a life of spending too much money, taking on too much debt, just because that's the thing that everybody else does. And our hero Ken here decides to go a different way. And we'll kind of explore some of the really, frankly, bizarre things that he does to avoid that debt slavery in the book. And I think even if you're not looking to live in a van or move to Alaska and work in a mining town, serving drinks to elderly vagabonds from society, you can still take away some very interesting tidbits from this book on how you can live a more minimalist life and get more with less.
Yeah, and let's start by talking about some of those things we take for granted, some of those limiting ideas, as you've called them. Things like, in order to live a normal life, you need to have a mortgage on a house. You need to have 2 cars in a garage. You need to have children that have nice little branded outfits so you can take Instagram pictures of them and not feel like a failure. A big limiting idea is that you need a degree from a prestigious school, whether you can afford it or not, no matter what. And when you read the story of somebody who shirks some of those responsibilities and does so successfully, in going to Alaska and completely eliminating his cost of living by, bunking up there, eating their meals, working whatever jobs were available. He also completely transformed himself by overcoming various challenges in the process of, earning that experience, So not only was he living with less, he was also expanding himself in the process. And I don't know, what out of all the things, you're told you're supposed to acquire when you get out of college to live a successful life, what's one example that maybe you've completely abandoned, besides stealing music and movies off the internet, besides that one? That you've completely abandoned? We got to support creativity more. I'm gonna do my part. Besides that, what's something that you've abandoned cost-wise that other people just sort of assume that they need?
I haven't owned a car since I was a teenager. I've lived on 3 different continents in half a dozen different cities, and I haven't had a car. And that saves me literally at least $10,000 a year just without doing something that everybody else thinks is standard. Um, you can see here my lovely apartment. It's homey and I like it, but it's not huge, and I haven't lived in huge places. However much money I was making, um, and in ways big and small, I try to cut back on all the materialism. Like, everybody here in Ireland does something for Lent. They give up something for Lent. So I've decided to give up shopping, and like most Americans, I have a Amazon trigger finger, and it's a really hard habit to kick at first, but I haven't bought anything since the start of Lent, and I feel like, much like Ken, once you do without things, you find that you don't actually need them.
I feel the weight of people's stuff, on them, and yet I feel that they form an emotional connection to each thing, because of the way it's been marketed, because of the sheen on it, or the way it makes them feel. Stuff looks orderly and clean, and when you pick it up and you're deciding if you're going to throw it in the trash, you go, "Can we give this one away?" No one wants one sock. Put that away. Like, people have a really hard time sort of detaching from all this stuff, and
Right.
what would help them do it is attaching to people, because then you realize,
Right.
oh, that stuff is a very cheap connection compared to people, and you start to realize how it's slowing you down and preventing you from having the real deal. You're getting the methadone when you could have that heroin. You're not forced to go to college. You're not forced to buy a house, but there's sort of you called it a consumer duty, and I love that term. And if you don't feel it, just start wearing the same t-shirt every day for a year. And eventually somebody will be like, "You should buy more shirts." You know what I mean? Just have my car. That's how you'll know your consumer duty. Because my car is nice. It drives well, everything. But for some reason, the paint really picks up bird shit. And so it just gets this nice coating, almost like a Candy Crunch, like around the whole thing. And I'm riding a shitmobile. And people look at me and they're like, "Devin, you need to do something about that." It's like, all right, well, I'm trying to take care of the dream and all these other things. It's like, no, clean your car first. There's a consumer duty. If you have an apartment and you don't keep it clean, somebody's going to call the city on you. There's almost norms and laws in place to make sure you spend at least some money and do.
Well, put it into context. Like, the average middle-class American person makes two huge purchases in their life. One is their house. And I don't know if anyone listening here has ever actually seen $350,000 cash put on a table.
You should have to pay it cash. That would stop so many. Like, you have to hold the cash.
Remember that scene in Breaking Bad where they just lay on top of the cash? Like, that's what that looks like. So we're talking $300,000 plus in cash that you're using to buy a house. And that's only the first major purchase. Now, people think, oh, well, I can afford to buy the house because I put on a down payment and I get a mortgage. And mortgage is, first of all, a fancy word for a debt. It's a loan. You don't own the house.
Yeah, why did they invent another word for that?
Well, because it's a euphemism. And actually, when you look up the meaning of
student mortgages, they call it student loans. That's what it is.
Yeah, what is more? I would have to look this up, but I heard somewhere that mortgage, the root of the word, mort, is death. So I think it means something death. Maybe you can Google that really fast.
And gauge means holes in your ears, so death with holes in your ears.
Yes, it's bad. It's bad. So you've got a mortgage. You take out a loan, essentially for 30 years. And you end up, because you take it out for 30 years, almost half of the money that you pay back to the bank is not even that $300,000. It's interest on that $300,000.
Now you've got to whip out another pile of money. That's just,
so
it's going to nowhere. It's just interest.
Over the course of a generation, you are literally dropping over $500,000 on that house, half of which is just interest for nothing, just to borrow money.
I think part of the problem is people don't realize how much $600,000 is, because they think, oh, I'll probably make several million in my life. You won't.
No, you won't.
What would you say over the course of a lifetime? A lot of people probably earn. They say a college degree can earn you
Yeah.
a million more.
Well, let me put that into context. The median American household, meaning like all the people living in that household, makes $59,000 a year, median. So if you're an average American, you might make 50 to 60K a year, and you're taking on a purchase for $500,000 with 60K a year, minus taxes, minus everything else you have to pay for. When you think about it that way, it's absolutely insane. And you think, well, I'm owning an asset. Yes, you are, and it will increase in value. But guess what? That house also costs you money. You have to pay property tax. That's 1 to 4% of the total value of the house every year. You have to pay maintenance, which is approximately 1% of the value of the house. You might have to pay some form of mortgage insurance, which is literally just an insurance that says you can pay your mortgage if you don't have money. And yeah, you can deduct some of that interest payment, but still, that house will cost you over time for the entire time you own it. And you don't actually own it until the end of the mortgage term. And let's face it, like, I've moved around, I don't know how many times in the last decade, at least 5 times. You've moved around almost as many times. And pretty much everyone we know has bounced around. How many people do we know are going to buy a house at age 25 and live in that house until they're 55? Until they actually own the house? Not many. So that when you have to think of it that way, and it might be a good decision for you. You might think, look, I want the house. I want to be able to customize it. I'm going to stay here. Or if I move, I'll rent it out. Then that could make sense. But people don't necessarily really think it through. And the same goes for going to college. If I told you today, Devin, you're going to go to college and over the next 4 years, you're going to drop 200K. Again, let's picture that Breaking Bad pile of cash in a rental unit. We're laying on top of the cash. It's a lot of cash. Nobody has ever even seen that much cash in one place. And yet you're signing away that you're going to pay that.
We've covered houses and stuff, I think. I think number 2 is college education, which is Ken's major focus in this book. He talks about attacking his debt like going to war. And I'd never really thought of it that way. But when you break down how important it is to not only put money aside for retirement, but have money to invest in your dreams and to make moves and do these other things, you do realize that getting $30,000 to $100,000 in debt just to do the expected move, which is what do all your counselors tell you when you're leaving college, or when you're leaving high school? Which college are you going to go to? You're a smart kid. You should go to college. I've seen schools that advertise, we get all of our graduates into college. It's like, did they all want to go? Did some of them want to go to community college and become nurses assistants and radiologists? And, did some of them just want to take a year to travel the world? Like, you got everyone to go to college? Okay, that doesn't seem like that much of a victory to me when you consider, as he says, 5,050 janitors have doctorates at the time that this book was written. A third of graduates with college degrees work in retail.
Today, it's even worse. When I was in school, it cost us with room and board, it was a private university, room and board, it was about almost $50,000 a year. And a lot of that was covered, in my case, with scholarships and grants, thankfully. But I still walked out of there with 5 figures of debt. Today, if somebody wanted to go to the same school, it's $70,000 a year. A year!
And when this book was written, he was talking about $22,000 and $10,000 for graduate school. It's like, man, this stuff it's escalating so quickly. And what's strange to me is that even the FAFSA, they determined, because we have an elderly dad and a mom working at a community college, and the two of us in a mountain of debt in our own home, they determined that we deserve some financial aid to go to school. But my FAFSA gave me a certain amount of aid, granted me a certain amount of aid, which I later learned was largely grants from George Washington for a private education, but going to a public school would have been even more expensive. So,
Yeah.
and I had done the community college route just like you, so essentially getting as many of my credits as I could at the cheapest possible rate, and still just with the two and the victory lap. Let's not forget the 2 to 3 years of education I got from the private school saddled me with the big $30K.
You would save tens of thousands of dollars from spending that semester or year abroad. And why is that? Because most university in Europe is free. Absolutely free.
And here's the thing,
$0.
Jeff. You're one of the few people I know who went the expat route and sought employment in other countries. I don't know anyone who's just been like, I'm going to go to Australia and get a free education. Why wasn't that presented to me by a counselor? Hey, if you can get a plane ticket, man, you can start a whole new life in an exotic, amazing place, and it's all free. Of course, the standard of the higher cost of living there and higher taxes if you become a citizen. But there are ways to do essentially education tourism. So you got to wonder, what's the real reason then? That is it just indoctrination that everyone's going to these schools, or is there something to what Ken mentions, which is a lot of people go into philosophy and they go into writing, and then all of a sudden finance, accounting, and Wall Street, and so the college almost becomes this opportunity to, yeah, sure, I want a liberal arts education, but hey, can you get me that high-paying job at Lockheed or that job trading? And
Well, you almost have to do it. I mean, in my school, I had art history majors and Arab sociology majors suddenly changed their tune in sometime early in senior year, and they're going to Wall Street. And I was thinking, since when are you a finance guy? Well, since they offered you $80,000 out of school, that's when.
It's a recruiting ground for these companies, but also a way to sort of saddle you with enough debt that you don't have much of a choice. If you let's say you become a lawyer or a doctor, you better love being a doctor when you get out. Because can you imagine having $400,000 in debt and not loving being a doctor, wanting to work at a coffee shop?
Well, you and I both know people who went to law school and they said, I want to be a constitutional lawyer or an immigration lawyer or a public interest attorney. And they end up having to work as a corporate lawyer for a big company because they have huge amounts of debt. I mean,
They don't have a choice.
If you go to professional school, some graduate school afterwards, like law school, you've got $500,000 in debt.
And that's what's so insidious about this.
Ain't no way you're going to pay that off without a Fortune 500 corporate lawyer job or working as a high-paid doctor for a long time.
That's what's so insidious about this, that the character Josh, Ken's best friend, who sort of picks the more conventional path and is saddled with even more debt and moral conundrums because of it. He talks about working for a for-profit college, essentially recruiting students to do exactly what he did, saddle themselves with debt. And he said, I can't get another job. No one's returning my my applications, so I guess I have to do this. And then all of a sudden you're one of the SS guards in Nazi Germany. Like, I guess I gotta look the other way because the comparison, of course, we have to have a Hitler comparison here, but there is a common thread between, can you ignore small ethical violations, which is going to do damage to your soul and damage to your confidence slowly over time, just because you don't have a choice. That number is going to come at the end of the month. And you can kick the can down the road, but it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And student loan debt, what happens if you die? Does it get forgiven? Is that at least the last reprieve, or do they harass your family?
You can't declare bankruptcy and get rid of student loan debt. It's the only debt that you can't clear. And I'm not sure whether it passes down, but it might, to be honest.
If everybody really thinks about what they're looking for and has an honest conversation about it, there's never one path. There's always 3 or 4 different ways for you to get it without saddling yourself with debt.
Well, so, let's face it. Most people reading this book aren't 17 or younger, right? So it's too late for most of our readers. They're like us. You went to college, took out a lot of debt. You quashed your dreams to some degree.
Or you didn't go to college and you got credit card debt,
Yeah, or something. Or you've got a big mortgage that you can hardly afford, or a huge car payment that eats up all of your take-home pay at the end of the month. So what do you do?
Quitting debt is like quitting drugs, and I'm an expert at both. You need to take on one thing at a time, okay? Let's say it's drinking water or quitting cigarettes. Maybe it's your car payment. Take on one thing at a time and decide, could I live without the nicest house? Could I live without buying new clothes this month? Could I go to the flea market instead of going to a designer store? If you just take a real accounting of your life, and in one category you've got, what do I want? And how do you decide what you want? What gives me a boner, essentially, for life? Like the female boner is real too. What just turns me on to life? And you know it when you feel it. Maybe it's playing laser tag. Start there. Maybe it's stalking people on Facebook. Whatever it is, don't question it. You know what I mean? And never question the desire phase. Because the desire phase is just about like you sit and you meditate and you go, what gives me that female boner? And then you decide all that, you write it all down, and then you decide, what am I paying for right now? And where are the links? What is encouraging what? And the stuff that's not making the cut, you're like a JV soccer coach. You got to go, weird four legs. I don't know what you're doing. You're all knees. You got to get out of here and start jogging and come back next year. You know what I mean? So figure out, and I'm amazed when I meet people, when I ask them, what do you really love? You know what I mean? Like outside of work, what is just your thing? Nobody has an answer really quick. Very few people are just boom. A lot of people go, I've never been asked that in my life. And that's the most important question. That's your compass. That's your true north.
So you're absolutely right. You got to figure out what is your true north. When you ask people, what would you do if you didn't have to worry about money? If you could do whatever you wanted to. You hear things like, well, I would spend more time with my family, or I would travel the world, or I would start a business, or I would do nothing. I would sit and read a book or play World of Warcraft, whatever. Like, whatever it is, you do you, live your best life. Most people, literally most people don't do that. And they don't do that in the wealthiest country in the world, which is bizarre when you think about it. Most of us have enough money to do pretty much what you want to do. There's a lot of poverty in the U.S., and it's not to be discounted. But most people who are middle class and above could do the things that they really want to do, not the things that they think they want.
Add a caveat to that. If you're honest about what really brings you joy, most of those things are free. Human connection, new experiences, travel, reading, ideas, being healthy, getting good. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I'll open the kimono a bit, and
let's see
as
that.
I like to say in my field, tech.
They say that in tech. Tech people are so strange.
Tech people.
Let me open my kimono.
Tech people are really weird. You're the one who lives in California.
First of all, it's cultural appropriation and sexual harassment in the same gesture. I love that.
Exactly. So in my life, when I started getting serious about money, and when I was in my 20s, I used to just bleed cash.
You had the addiction, man. You love the shop therapy.
I loved shopping. I loved buying stupid crap. I didn't earn much money. I drank a lot. I was just bleeding. I was just hemorrhaging cash. And then one day I sat down and I thought about it, and I said, what if instead of at the end of every month when rent is due, instead of rolling the dice and being like, maybe I'll make it, I actually added up everything and thought about, okay, here's what I earn, here's what I spend, is there a difference? And I think, to be frankly honest, I'm not the only one who has no clue. We don't know what we spend. Maybe you're one of the good ones and use mint.com, or maybe you've got a spreadsheet, or maybe you're old school and write it down on a balance sheet on paper. But most millennials do not keep a budget. And if you don't keep a budget, you don't know what you're earning, what you're spending. You also don't know what you value. And I say that because the things that you spend money on are the things that you value. And that sounds obvious, but how do you get money? You get money by selling your time or your talent for money. And therefore, you're spending your time and your talent on whatever you spend money on. And most of us don't even think about that. So if you broke it down and you said, how much do I get paid an hour? Maybe it's 20, maybe it's $30 an hour, and I'm going to go buy an iPhone X. How many hours of my life did I use to purchase that iPhone X? I don't think about it that way because I just need the iPhone X. That's just the default. So what do? What Ken did was extreme. Living in a van and, taking bucket showers and eating ramen noodles in a camping stove and living this vagabond life is not for most people. And it's got a lot of downsides, which I think he's pretty candid about. And at best, it might be a temporary condition for somebody like him who's in their early 20s and is looking for adventure anyway and doesn't have a family or kids and is willing to do that for a little while to pay down the debt or just have an adventure without bleeding so much cash all the time. But what about for the rest of us? What can we take away from this book? What can we do tomorrow to relieve some of this anxiety, to have a little less debt, to be able to save a little more, to feel like we have more control over our lives?
If you're the kind of person that can't keep a budget like me, Jeff, your budget is very impressive, and I noticed that's sort of a new thing that you've been picking up, keeping track of things and playing the game of sort of reducing the amount that you're spending so that you can put it in investments and have more freedom moving forward. We don't have an inheritance waiting for us, but you're setting one up for the future by making smart decisions now. And that's definitely helped by keeping track of the data. I wish I was more like you, more like a Tim Ferriss type, just like super analytical and spreadsheet oriented. But for those of us who are just going on feelings, you love the feeling of purchasing. I'm watching a couple people who are addicted to buying things now. I'm watching them very closely because I love different addictions. I'll watch a gambling addict for 10 minutes if I can. Watching somebody go, maybe I need a new frame for my wall. Oh, you don't have any money and you don't have a job. Yeah, true. And then the idea doesn't go away until they click it, and then the idea disappears. Just like when you have the idea of snorting a line of something. It's the same exact. Until that shit is in your nose, you are thinking about it. So how do you avoid that? That's a whole different conversation we're going to have. We're going to have the financial planning conversation with your spreadsheets and all that. We're going to have the conversation about how to quit addictive behavior, because that is a whole different can of worms. But I just want to end by saying, if you become addicted to the feeling of saving, it has a way of pushing out other addictions. You know what I mean? So if you really, at the end of the month, really, cut out coffee this month or whatever it is, and then at the end of the month, pay attention to not everything you spent, because mint.com doesn't work that well. It's hard for me at least, to understand my finances that way. But look at how much you have left at the end, okay? And spend some time with that. And maybe buy something with that. You know what I mean? Because that's your money. And people aren't very ceremonial about stuff, but ceremony matters. You got to sit down with that and go, that's $300. I'm used to having, will I have enough money? I'm used to that feeling. Now I have this feeling. And get addicted to that. Because if you're an addictive person like myself, the only thing that's going to stop you from doing the shop therapy is doing the saving therapy. And Ken Ilgunis talks a lot in his book about just how much fun it is to sort of adopt a game. Like, I'm going to vanquish this debt. You know what I mean? I'm going to have so much savings that in 3 months I'm going to travel to South America, or in 3 months I'm going to, travel to Colorado, wherever. Get addicted to the positive behavior is what I would say if you can't keep a budget.
100%. I mean, you and I both know people who make a lot of money who don't actually have any money. And if you make $50,000 a year and you save 11% of that, you are richer than somebody who makes $100,000 and saves 5% of that. Think about that.
It doesn't matter so much how much you're earning. It matters what you do with that. And there are a lot of different options at every stage. So definitely worth checking out. I wish he had given a few more details. I love details. I want to know, he talks about cleaning in his van, using like a little bit of sand in a pot. And like he just has a whole bunch of life hacks in there. And if anybody, if any of y'all have made it to the end of the video, you want to share some of your life hacks or some things that have helped you reduce spending. And remember, reducing spending equals buying freedom. You said money equals work hours and talent. Now you have more time to use your work hours and talent for your Etsy store or your YouTube channel, or just, like I said, stalking that cutie on Facebook or whatever. Facebook stalking, I guess, is an American pastime now. Whatever you're passionate about, and that's an addictive feeling. That will become, once again, like we were saying, you know, there's the hollow joys in life that replace the real thing, and then there's the real thing. And I would argue that beating addiction and becoming a self-empowered person and connecting more with others in a way that's efficient and self-sustaining and, you know, your low carbon footprint, if that's your thing, all of that feels good. Feels really, really good.
Well, to bring it back to the OG Benji Franklin, you know, the guy who was on the $100 bill, a penny saved is a penny earned. And a penny, but the theme of the book is not only that, a penny saved is a penny earned, but a penny saved is freedom earned. You know, it's another day to yourself.
You bought a penny's worth of yourself.
Exactly. You've bought back your time and your life and your meaning from whoever you sold it to.
All right, we're going to end it there. Thank you for watching the Not Boring Book Club. Hopefully it was not boring. If it was this week, next week.
If it was, be kind.
Yeah, next week we're going to be wearing dresses. We'll do whatever it takes for you all, whatever you love.